Does Minister Bathabile Dlamini have the interests of social grants beneficiaries at heart? Is Cash Paymaster Services holding the Social Development Department at ransom? Has the department deliberately defied the Constitutional Court's 2014 ruling on CPS? What can be made of today's ruling by the highest court in the land to defer judgment? What time is it? It's question time. Welcome to the show. My name is Mpho Tsedu. The social grants payment saga continues to grip the country. Today, the Constitutional Court had arguments from an NGO Black Sash, who are arguing that the court must oversee the entire grant payment process. Legal representatives of the Social Development Department, Cash Paymaster Services, and Black Sash deliberated on the best possible arrangement to ensure that 17 million beneficiaries will receive their payments on 1st April. While a conclusion is yet to be reached, some political parties are calling for Minister Bathabile Dlamini's resignation. Meanwhile, a ministerial task team headed by Minister in the Presidency Jeff Radebe has announced that it will find new negotiators to strike a reasonable deal with CPS to pay out the grants. We are live, therefore you can call us and air your views. The number is 0891104210, our Twitter handle @QuestionTime24. Before we get into today's show, let's take a look at what Minister of Social Development Bathabile Dlamini had to say.
There is a crisis at SASSA. Is therefore nothing more than a mere self-serving propaganda and political grandstanding of the highest order. They must stop with their scare campaign, which has caused public panic and anxiety.
Well, that's the Minister of Social Development, Bathabile Dlamini. My guest today, Professor Stephen Friedman. He's a political analyst, and from our Parliament studio is Themba Godi. He's the chairperson of Standing Committee on Public Accounts, SCOPA. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Let me just go to Cape Town first. Themba, is this a political hot potato, grandstanding? What is it? How would you describe it?
No, I think the facts speak for themselves. And for the few minutes that I was able to watch the proceedings when the lawyer for SASSA had taken the stand, I think there was no dispute from their side that we have a challenge in our hands. So there's nothing imaginary. The facts are there. We're in court because things have not gone the way they were supposed to have gone. 2 weeks from the expiry of a 5-year contract, we have no contract in place to have a service provider who is going to continue paying social grants. So nothing is imaginary. It is real. We have a real problem in our hands.
What was your impression when the department appeared before SCOPA? And after obviously talking to Finance Ministry as well?
No, our sense is what I've expressed consistently, that the situation we find ourselves in is a well-orchestrated, cynical plot to put the country in a situation where we're left with no option but to continue with the CPS as service provider. It's been clear all along from looking in retrospect and from questioning and interaction with officials that there are many officials at very senior level in SASSA and in the department who want to do the right thing. But the reality is that the minister herself, has been very, very heavy-handed in an intervention, illegal intervention in administrative matters and in matters of finding a service provider to replace CPS in a way that had put her at loggerheads with key people like a former DG, like the current CEO of SASSA, who had different views in terms of what needed to be done, which would have resulted in something completely different from CPS.
Now, well, you've accused CPS as being, a company with a colonial mindset and all that. Do they comply to the laws of the country in terms of BEE? And if so, who are these black people in this company?
Well, we asked that question repeatedly to the Minister of Social Development, that, well, you have had this company for 5 years, you want to go into a short-term contract with them. Can you tell us who their BEE partners are? She blatantly refused to talk to that. Well, I might not have done research on exactly who they have there, but I think news is out there which indicates that there are all sorts of dubious schemes that they have put in place. It is a company whose CEO, I must say, I don't think that he respects government, and a company that I would say robs the poor grant recipients by funny schemes around airtime, around purchasing electricity, and having a machonisa company that preys on grant recipients, things that are completely illegal. So I would imagine, for me, being the guys being foreigners, they are like the old colonial fellows who came to Africa to get the wealth, transport, ship it out of the country to their country of origin. I see the same mentality, whether consciously or not, but the actions have the same effect.
Prof, how would you summarize today's proceedings in court?
Well, I think the court's trying to deal with precisely the sort of problem that Mr. Gordy is talking about. The court's being held to ransom, the country's being held to ransom, and therefore you have to find a way out of that. The court's dilemma, as we know, and some of the judges said this today, is obviously the court wants people to be paid grants. On the other hand, the court is not prepared to simply rubber stamp an illegal agreement. I mean, your question about CPS's BEE credentials is very straightforward. The court ruled that they don't have adequate BEE credentials. That's the highest court in the land, has said that they don't cut it as far as BEE is concerned. So what the court has to now do is to try to find a way out of that. And the route that's been suggested to it by the Black Sash's lawyers is that it takes over the contract. I'm afraid the reality that we sit with, and it's a very unfortunate reality, and I would agree with Mr. Gordy on that, is that we are stuck with this company for at least a while. Okay. But what the court can do, and what the court's been asked to do, is that it can instruct the company on how to behave. And of course the court can say, look, we're going to put up with you for, say, a year or whatever, but after that we have to make other arrangements.
Mary, you are in Port Elizabeth. Mary? Okay, Mary is no longer there. But please do give us a call. 089-110-4210. 089-110-4210. So, Prof, what would be the solution to this?
Well, the only solution at this stage in the short term seems to be that the court will have to intervene and the court will have to tell CPS what to do. Now, as far as I read the law, and as I understand the law from lawyers, the court can actually do this. The court can say, look, you are, in effect, conducting yourself as you're doing a service for government, and the court has the right to tell you how to do it. Obviously, the court has to be realistic. I mean, if it tells them to do it for nothing, then the company goes bankrupt. But I think what you're probably going to see is that the court is going to try to balance making sure that the company continues for a while to provide the grants with actually laying down conditions. You know, it's not only this question of how much they paid to produce the grants, which is a major issue. It's also the other question that Mr. Gordy raised, which is how are they conducting themselves? There are allegations that there are 100,000 cases in which people who receive grants claim that they're being exploited by subsidiaries of Cash Paymaster services. So clearly the court has to take a position on that. The court has to look into that and say, look, we are going to make sure that there's at least going to be no illegal behavior here.
Temba, how much is CPS making per month? I mean, they refused to answer that question in court, but I would want to believe that you are in a privileged position to can share with us some of this information.
Yes, well, they were charging around 16 rand 44 cents per beneficiary. So if you've done arithmetics, even with Bantu education, it will take you to a couple of 100 million per month, which will give you close to about 2 billion rands per year, purely out of the disbursement of grants. But we see that their Machonisa portfolio was close to 1 billion rands, which they are making out of the recipients of social grants.
Nebili, you are in Volleys. Yes.
Yeah. I think for me, the Constitutional Court must take a harsh punishment against CPS because they are robbing our own people, especially old people, about their loaning their money, the electricity. So for me, I think what I can say, the Minister of Development, Bathabile Dlamini, yes. I think is involved. They are benefiting from this CPS. So I think the Constitutional Court, the only hope, the Constitutional Court must come to a hard decision, hard punishment, please.
Okay. Thanks.
My name is Nwetile.
Oh, Nwetile. Yes. Thank you very much for clarifying that. My apologies, man. Nwetile, they're calling us from Volmaran starting for Volleys. But how far can the court go, Prof?
Well, that's the question. You see, I think that most people would agree with what the caller is saying. The problem is that you have to make sure that the grants are delivered. So the court has to try to come to some compromise, which means that they can carry on doing it, but not hopefully in the exploitative way that they've been doing it before. You know, this is not the only case. We've never had this experience quite in this way, but I mean, I've done some work on constitutional courts around the world. In India, for example, the constitutional court there very often has to negotiate with the parties to come up with a solution. And the court may find itself in that position. But of course, it has got a stick. I mean, it can say to CPS, look, you know, you are getting billions of rands out of this, and we do have the power to take this away from you. So it's not as if they don't have bargaining power, but obviously they can't. I think most people in the country would love them to just crack the whip. But if they crack the whip in a way in which people are not paid, obviously that doesn't work either.
Joyce, you are around Gauteng. Welcome.
Hello, Mpo.
Yes, I'm well. Thanks for the call.
Very good, man. Yeah, this thing is happening. You see, it looks like Minister Bathabile and the service provider, you know, CPS,
yes,
they are eating from one plate. So these people, CPS, it looks like I'm sure Minister Dlamini and other officials in the department, they are benefiting from the people, from that money. But now they ended up leaving the contract expired. Look, now a typical example. If the Department of Water Affairs, they are telling us now, in 2 days will be closing water. We cannot sit and leave the department to close water.
I'm battling with your line. I would have to cut it. We can't hear you very well there, but I think you're making quite serious, not allegations, but you're expressing thoughts and feelings about a matter where we do not necessarily have proof. I'm sure you didn't go to that extent. You don't have any proof that the minister is benefiting in any way, Temba?
Well, not really. I think the point we're making, I'm sure those who know law would say, you know, circumstantially, you are saying here is a company that has disgraced or embarrassed government by obtaining a multi-billion contract in ways that the highest court in the land has declared unlawful.
Yes.
I would imagine that anybody would want to disassociate from that company at the earliest possible opportunity. And yet we see people fighting tooth and nail to ensure that this company continues, not only for a year or 2 years, but for about 3 years more. Now the question that arises is what interests are being protected and whose interests And I think for me, it is a question that those who are involved must be able to answer, because it's a very, very strange behavior.
Okay, Agnes, you are in Burgersfort. Welcome.
Agnes, from Burgersfort, and that.
Khodzo Maran.
Ne ke nya gore go commenta hanyane gore ke bona ka re SASSA e right ka lebaka la gore e fa ba tsheleta bona ka moka ha ona se ba tsitsiang ho ka tla mo Burgersfort bo ho tletse di office tsa bo mashonisa ene ba nya ka batho ba SASSA fele ba tshwereng dikarata tsa CPS a ba nya ke tsa SASSA go ra gore SASSA e right ka lebaka la gore ba fa batho ba borena ditšhelete tsa bona di itekanetse.
Kati cheki chepedi Maran.
Mama,
kati cheki chepedi una le CPS le SASSA.
Hona le CPS le SASSA. Nna ke bona tare e kaone ke SASSA ka lebaka la gore bona ba fa tšhelete ha o itekanetse. Ho ya ku CPS bona ba go tsoro tshwantsho change card, and then ho no change card, there is no turning back ya gore ba o busetsa hape ba re tsa motse ya hape ya card. Always o tshwantsho o ye o nyake tšhelete. And ke bona kare e wrong for batho ba rena ka gore bona self a bana tšhelete.
Okay.
And hence ba di ma tšhelete ana tšhelete bona always e tla e shorta. Wa bona.
Okay, Magnus, they're saying, well, there are two cards out there. There's the CPS card and the SASSA card, and she prefers the SASSA one. Well, you heard the call, Temba. Please, your comment on that.
Yeah, I think, look, the law says that you can't deduct more than a particular percentage from the grant, from the money of a grant recipient. If you are to do so, you must get the written permission of the minister to do so. So any deduction that is made on the money of grant recipients, that is beyond, I think it's about 20%, without the permission of the minister is illegal. But here is the point. I think the CEO of SASSA, when he was still in the Department of Social Development, actually took CPS to court on this matter. But I think he was stopped on his track because of political interference. Okay. Now, here was a man who was trying to bring CPS to book for doing illegal things, but just did not have the necessary support to be able to serve the best interests of our people.
Okay, James, you are in table view. Welcome.
Good day, Mpo. I think the problem is the system of putting executives working with appointed people is not good for the country, because these politically appointed might not be even aware of the job description which they must do. So I think sometimes you really need ministers who have gone up the ranks, not these political people who are loyal to the government. So if ever they don't own up to their duties, they will always deny it, because we are fighting them politically, and at the same time, they don't want to die in their political career. But really, Bathabile must go, because she did not do a good job. Thank you. Thanks,
James. Thanks, Prof. What are your impressions? Well, I don't know if I'm using the right word for you, but okay, what are your views about the minister right now?
Well, the minister and the department have failed. There's no doubt about that. I mean, what we're dealing with here is a public-private partnership. The idea is that you put a private provider together with government because the private provider is more efficient. That's the theory. The problem is it's not really a partnership unless government actually comes to the party and makes sure that the private provider does what is in the interests of the country. So this example that Temba Gordy is mentioning, in which the head of SASSA tries to intervene, that's what government is supposed to do in a situation like this. You know, Agnes, the caller who's talking about what she calls the Mashonisa card, I mean, that should never be allowed in a public-private partnership. What she's talking about is a situation in which a private company is using the grants program in order to sell its product. And even if it's not true that it's forcing it on people, it's placing people in a position where they have no option. Some official who's paying out your grant says to you, take this card as well, and suddenly you're in debt. So the real failure here is that this is not a public-private partnership. The Chief Justice, incidentally, intervene today if people were listening. And he made precisely this point. He said, why are we taking on these kind of arrangements if we don't know how to manage them properly? So whether you question the minister's motives or not, the fact of the matter is that the Department of Social Development failed to look after the public interest in its dealings with CPS.
Agnes, you are in Pretoria North.
Hello?
Hello?
How are you?
I'm well. Is this Agnes?
Good. My question, I just want to my question on Tembagudi.
Okay.
Because le boletse ka 10 is unlawful, then why ba tswela pele ka tender ile unlawful? And another question is that why ba advance tender in time? Then or what by PL, then by MLA expire within 2 days, and we can negotiate the deal of the tender. Well, maybe 3 months before.
Okay.
That's my question to the chairperson of Scope. Or why were not by Alawa or the treasury allow that situation?
All right. Temba, you heard the question.
No. I think there was some
distortion. Well, he says, why do you allow a contract which is unlawful to continue running for 3 years or so?
I'm sure the professor should have responded to that. Because there was a constitutional court ruling, and it is the constitutional court that allowed the contract to continue, because if it was stopped at that point, there could have been a disruption in the payment of grants. Okay. And even now, we have been put in a situation where you can't just throw away CPS today when their contract is finishing in 2 weeks, because in 2 weeks, you can't get anyone who will have the capacity to distribute grants smoothly. So we have been held at ransom as a country.
But Temba, is this therefore an emergency?
Well, it is an emergency, but is it the will of God or the will of man? I think it's not the will of God. It's nothing that happened overnight. It is something that took 5 years to be brewed.
Exactly my point. Therefore, it shouldn't be. Yes, I understand the agency with which it needs to be resolved, but Prof, really, it was not supposed to be an emergency.
Well, it should never become an emergency. And I guess what the previous caller is saying is, could other parts of government have intervened to stop this happening? I don't think it's fair to say could SCOPA have intervened to stop this happening, because I don't think that SCOPA's function is not to police constitutional court judgments. But I think you could say that there was a cabinet responsibility here, that the cabinet had a responsibility to say, look, you've got this court judgment against you. How are you reporting to us on how you're dealing with it? Because, we do stick with an emergency. We sit with an emergency now because as the judges kept on saying today, sort of tearing their hair out, you ignored us. You didn't pay any attention to us. You didn't deal with what we told you to do. And I think it's legitimate to say, where was the cabinet in this? Where was the presidency in this? Because it's government. It's as an entity is responsible for this. You can't just say, look, the minister did this and we had nothing to do with it. So I think it is a legitimate question.
Temba, just take off your SCOPA head for a sec and were the APC won. What should happen to the minister?
Well, irrespective of the cap that I wear, the facts are screaming by themselves. Look, for me, in the first instance, when the Constitutional Court made a ruling that the initial contract was illegal, heads should have rolled at that point. Now we're in a situation of a crisis for the country. Surely those responsible heads must roll, not only administratively, but political. And the political head of that department is Minister Bathabile Dlamini, who, for me, has failed the most basic of things, to stand in front of the nation and say, look, I messed up, I own up, give me a chance to correct this thing, rather than to be defiant like you saw yesterday in the House and say there is no crisis, this is just the product of the prophets of doom. Why are we in court today? Why are we not having a contract 2 weeks before the expiry of a 5-year contract? I think she must fall. She must take the fall.
Okay. Prof, in Zimbabwe they use manure and seed and other things towards elections. We've had stories of, grants also being a political tool. What are the risks?
Well, so far we've avoided the risks. The risks are obviously that people try to manipulate the system so that you don't get a grant unless you support a particular political party. At the moment, it is very difficult to do that in our system because the law says you're supposed to get the grant. And I've seen research from colleagues at UJ which is a very big plus, that people on the ground who've been interviewed on these issues, they know perfectly well that they're entitled to this grant. And their attitude is, we're not going to let any politician take this grant away from us. So I think we're in a very strong position there.
Okay. Prof, thank you very much. Temba, thank you so much for your time as well. That was question time for today. A big thank you to my guests and to you for watching the show. From me and the rest of the crew, Mudimwa Tawasio, Alete Handle.